Have you ever looked at the global car market and wondered why some countries just take off, building these massive automotive empires, while others with the same big dreams seem to be stuck at the starting line? Well, today, we're diving into a fascinating puzzle, the story of Pakistan's auto industry. It's a 40-year journey that promised so much, but, well, delivered something completely different.
So this is the big question we're going to try and answer. How did an industry that was protected and nurtured by the government for decades just fail to keep up? We're going to unpack the policies, the key players, and the, let's say, unintended consequences that led us right here.
I mean, just look at this contrast. On one side, you've got the giants, Japan, Korea, China. They all followed this classic playbook. Start by assembling cars, get really good at it, and then move on to designing your own and taking over the world market. But on the other side, you have Pakistan. 4 decades later, and the industry is still, for the most part, just assembling kits. Not much to show for it in terms of exports or real homegrown innovation. So what on earth happened?
Okay, so let's rewind and start at the very beginning with Section 1, a nation's stalled dream. This is where that big ambition ran headfirst into a very complicated and ultimately a very disappointing reality.
It all kicked off back in 1984 with this really ambitious policy called the deletion program. The goal was huge: get 75% of car parts made locally in just 5 years. But, and this is a big but, the foreign car companies held all the keys. They controlled all the important technology, so they only allowed low-tech stuff, the simple parts, to be made locally. The really crucial, high-value components, we're talking engines, transmissions, all the electronics, all of that stayed imported. And that fundamental dependency, it's pretty much still the reality today. So how did they maintain this level of control? Honestly, it was pretty clever. The deals weren't even signed with the main car companies, but with their overseas trading arms. The licenses to build cars were strictly limited to Pakistan, which killed any chance of exporting right from the get-go. The foreign bosses decided exactly what went into the assembly kits, and if a local company wanted to make a new part, they needed explicit permission. It was a totally closed loop, designed to benefit the global company, not to build up Pakistan's own industry. Okay, let's move on to Section 2 and see how this all created what we can call the protective policy bubble. This is all about how high tariffs created this little captive market with some, let's just say, bad habits. To really get what was happening inside this bubble, you have to understand this term rentier habits. Think of it this way. Instead of trying to create more wealth by becoming more efficient or innovative, the industry learned that it was just easier to make money by asking the government for protection. Massive taxes on imported cars meant they had a captive audience, so there was no real pressure to get better or cheaper. I mean, why innovate when you can just lobby for a bigger wall?
But here's a fascinating little twist. This chart shows something really telling. The motorcycle and tractor industries, they knocked it out of the park. They achieved huge localization, over 90% and 80%. They became genuinely competitive industries. But the car and truck sector, lagging way behind. Now, this is so important because it proves that localization was possible. Something was uniquely holding back the car companies.
And that brings us to Section 3, the temporary fix problem. This is where we uncover the single biggest policy that basically locked the industry in place. It was a policy that was supposed to be a temporary bridge, but it ended up becoming a permanent barrier. Okay, so in 2006, the World Trade Organization was putting on the pressure, so Pakistan had to ditch its old system. They brought in a new one called the Tariff-Based System, or TBS. And here's the key. It was designed to be a temporary 3-year measure to help the industry adjust. Just 3 years. Keep that number in your head. Right, so that 3-year temporary fix, it's still in place. Today, 18 years later, this little stopgap measure has become the permanent, defining reality for the entire auto industry in Pakistan. So what exactly is this TBS? Well, here's the kicker. It completely abandoned the goal of progressively making more parts locally. Instead, it just slapped high tariffs on the specific parts that had already been localized. It basically froze development right where it was. It was a smokescreen to make it look like they were following world trade rules, but what it really did was create what the source material calls a glass ceiling, a hard limit that the industry could just never break through. Now, to really grasp the impact of this, let's step outside the car industry for a second in Section 4. What happened to other local industries when their protection was taken away around the same time? The comparison is, well, it's pretty eye-opening. This right here is where the story gets really clear. The TV industry, which had very low local content, got completely wiped out when the world shifted from old CRT TVs to LEDs.
They just had no local supply chain to help them adapt. But refrigerators and washing machines? Totally different story. They had high levels of local parts, and they thrived. They were resilient. The lesson couldn't be clearer. A deep, local manufacturing base creates strength. The auto industry, trapped by its special protection, learned the exact opposite lesson, that overprotection just leads to stagnation.
So, we've pretty much diagnosed the problem. Now what? We turn to Section 5, Charting a New Road. Is there actually a way for the industry to finally break free from this cycle?
Well, the first proposed step is a total overhaul of the tariff system. Instead of the crazy, complex web of rules we have now protecting every little part, the idea is to simplify everything. You bring down the huge tariff walls on fully imported cars to a maximum of 50%. That would introduce some real competition. And at the same time, you have lower, uniform tariffs on parts that aren't made in Pakistan yet to encourage local assembly to grow. It's about creating a level playing field for once.
But it's not just about tariffs. The proposal lays out a real blueprint for development. First, you have to invest in the basic supply chain, the metals, chemicals, and plastics that everything is made from. Second, you change the rules so companies can properly invest in things like brand and design. And third, you create a dedicated venture capital fund to give this sector the kind of patient, long-term investment it actually needs. This is about building a real, sustainable ecosystem from the ground up.
And the clock is ticking on all of this. The entire world is shifting to electric vehicles, and Pakistan is in serious danger of making the exact same mistake all over again, just importing EV kits and tech instead of actually learning how to build and innovate from within. That core issue of dependency, the very problem that started this whole mess 40 years ago, is still there.
This quote from the source material just sums up the stakes perfectly. That feeling of comfort from being protected today comes at a massive price tomorrow. Over time, the cost of inertia would be paid by the industry itself, in the form of no growth and even redundancy. The cost of doing nothing, that cost of inertia, could eventually be the industry becoming completely irrelevant.
And that brings us back to where we started, but hopefully with a much clearer picture. The policies of the past didn't build a launch pad, they built a comfortable cage. The only way forward is to dismantle that cage and start building a real foundation for growth. So the final question is, after 40 years on the sidelines, can Pakistan finally shatter that glass ceiling and join the race? What do you think?